All right, folks, welcome to the May 23rd edition of Garden Hour. My name is Amanda Bachman. I'll be your host this evening. I'm the Pesticide Education and Urban Entomology Field Specialist for SDSU Extension, based in Pierre, which is pretty toasty right now. And joining us tonight, we have Laura Edwards, Dr. John Ball, and Dr. Rhoda Burrows. Laura, what will you be sharing with us tonight?
I'll be giving an update on the climate outlook for June and kind of where we've been here just recently on temperature and precipitation.
Awesome. And John, what's new in your world?
We're still going to be talking about winter injury and crazy squirrels. So that's what I'm going to be covering today.
Now I'm regretting not putting the squirrel picture in my presentation. I found some squirrel damage and I thought of you. And Rhoda, what will be on the agenda from you tonight?
We're going to be looking at strawberries tonight. They
Awesome.
are blooming in my yard. So
fantastic. Yeah, I've been seeing pictures from friends of mine who live much farther south that they're already picking strawberries, and I'm very jealous. So without further ado, hopefully everybody caught the intro reel, but again, if you'd like to ask us questions, you can throw that into the chat, or even better, you can put it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you're on desktop. Feel free to type in questions at any point, and I will field those to our guests and featured speakers at the end of each segment, and then we'll get to questions at the end as time allows. So with that, I'll turn the virtual microphone over to Laura.
All right, thank you, Amanda. And I have actually a fair bit of information to share with you today, so I'm going to talk a little bit fast so I can allow enough time for Dr. Burrows and Dr. Ball to share their information here tonight as well. Since this is the first time I'm visiting with you this spring, just thought I'd look at the last 30 days and just kind of see where we've been here in the spring so far. After a very cold March and April, May has really turned around towards warmer than average temperatures for many of us. So any of the dots here on this temperature map, this is how different we've been from average temperature for the last 30 days. Anything in the oranges, reds, warmer than average. You can see the scale at the bottom there. Anything in the yellow to light green is right near average. So there were some cold temperatures there up until that first week of May, the first few days of May, really. But then we've trended warmer for a lot of us. So we've turned around very quickly. Just at the start of this, we were talking about growing degree days, and that is reflective of average temperature, and you accumulate growing degree days each day, and that is often an indicator of different plant development or even insect development or insect emergence at different stages. And to calculate growing degree days, you take the average temperature of the day, maximum plus minimum divided by 2, and then you subtract a base temperature. For example, like corn, you subtract 50, and that number you have left over is your growing degree days for the day. You add those up, and when you get to certain numbers, certain levels, you can estimate what growth stage you'll be at. And so we're accumulating growing degree days very quickly now, much faster than typical for this time of year, because our temperatures are really consistently above average right now, especially this week. Just to talk about the last freeze, sometimes we get worried around this time of year where we got our gardens put in and things are coming up really nice. We worry about if we might see a late frost. For the record, I don't see that coming around in the next few weeks, so I think we're pretty safe. And so looking back at when did we see our last freeze, anything in the red color, we saw that last freeze 16 to 20 days ago. So for many of us in South Dakota, it was May 2nd or 3rd is when we saw our last freeze, which is a little earlier than typical. And I remember at the time thinking, gosh, things look warmer, we might not see another freeze, and sure enough, we really haven't for most of us. Some of those areas in the purple maybe saw a 32 degree brief freeze more recently, but for most of the state, we haven't seen a frost really since the first week of May. So good news, and also showing how warm our temperatures have been for this time of year. Looking at the soil side of things, not just the air temperature, this is using our South Dakota Mesonet, and oh shoot, I neglected to put the website in there, but look at Mesonet on the bottom right corner of the graphic there, mesonet.sdstate.edu. Maybe Amanda, if you could type that in the chat. You can see real-time data every 5 minutes, and they've just installed some new stations down south in Gregory County, at Winter. I forget the name of this one there, at Millette County. So there's a handful of new stations going in. They're planning on installing, I believe it's 25 stations this summer. So basically 2 a week. So if you're one of the holes in the state, keep an eye out. For the summer, they're going to be filling in some of those holes with weather stations. But regardless of that, 4-inch soil temperature, 60s and 70s, very warm temperatures for this time of year. I know asparagus came up here probably a week or 2 ago, week and a half ago, wild asparagus, and things are coming up really quick and probably not lasting too long because our soil temperatures are so warm right now. Precipitation, where have you been just lately? You know, we've seen quite a bit of drought last year. When you look at the last 30 days, West River, wow, really wetter than average. A lot of that though is from a week and a half ago, basically 2 weekends ago, where we saw 3 to 5 inches of rain, and even a little bit more in some areas. That really bumped them up to wetter than average. But you look in the east, especially the southeast, really drier than average, about 25% of average precipitation in the last 30 days. This time of year, typically we see about 3/4 to an inch a week. So we can fall behind very quickly in the months of May and June if we don't get something close to that every week. And so we've been trending on the dry side, certainly there in the southeast especially. Looking at soil moisture though, I would say this is looking at the Mesonet, and we have a little legend there at the bottom. You know, anything in that light blue to green color, anything blue or in the light or in the green color, I would say is adequate. You know, we're doing okay on soil moisture. A lot of it in the west is due to that heavy rain again about a week and a half ago. A lot of the east is kind of residual from the snowmelt season. Really, a month ago, we still had snow on the ground in a lot of areas in the north, at least. So, you know, we've been able to retain some of that soil moisture. The roots and our plants and crops aren't using a whole ton of moisture yet, but as they grow, get deeper roots, and as we continue to see some warmer temperatures, we will be demanding more from that soil moisture, and we'll see some changes, I'm sure, as we go through the season. Drought is one of those things that we are still thinking about, especially in the southeast, still hanging on to that D1 moderate drought area. Everything, all these other, and in the southwest, kind of the corners here. The yellow areas are areas where we see lingering dryness, I would say. And that's kind of based on some of our soil moisture data, based on our precipitation data. And a lot of those areas have shown improvement over the last couple of months, but just haven't gotten totally drought free yet. Precipitation coming up. So, you know, we're coming up on Memorial Day weekend. I know a lot of people are still planting their gardens, still getting things in the ground and in your beds and all that. I know I'm behind myself up here. Next 7 days, total precipitation in eastern South Dakota, really pretty dry. And as I said, typically we get about 1 inch a week. We're going to be losing some moisture here in the next week or so. Out west is where we see higher chances of precipitation, you know, here in the next few days, especially. And you can see over the Black Hills, kind of the bullseye. That's not surprising. Typically, that's kind of a hot spot, so to speak, a wetter spot due to the terrain, the topography, kind of kicking up some storms often. But yeah, generally better chances in the west, but really not a lot, less than 1/2 inch for most of the state in the coming week. So not too wet. you might want to get those sprinklers going, your irrigation going if you don't already have that set up already. This might be the week to do it. You know, with temperatures right now, we hit 90 degrees here in Aberdeen today. First time we've seen 90 degrees since September, I think 20th or something of last year. Both our high and low temperatures here this week for this probably like 5-day period or more, about 10 degrees above average. So we're really quite warm for this time of year, both on our high and low temperatures. And again, we're accumulating those growing degree days very rapidly, and plants, insects, weeds, everything is coming up fast and needing some more moisture. As we look out about a week from now, 6 to 10 days from now, look on the left, very high likelihood, very high confidence in above average temperatures here all across the north central states. And that brings us right into early June. So really continuing the trend of warmer than average temperatures. So again, keep that irrigation, keep that water going to keep those young plants alive. And I'm sure John will address trees and other things too. On the precipitation side, kind of a mixed bag there, a little less certainty, where South Dakota is kind of a transition area between an area that's favored to be wetter out west and drier kind of over the Great Lakes. So we're kind of somewhere in between, kind of a time of transition there. What's really interesting here is we're not quite in our full-on summer climate pattern. Typically in the summer, when we have heat, we typically also have dry conditions with that. But that's not the case necessarily right now, as you see in western South Dakota and over the northern Rockies area. There's a slight hint towards wetter conditions there in that 6 to 10 day period. That tells us we're not quite in our summer pattern yet. We're still seeing maybe some moisture come from the southwest, or maybe our weather patterns just kind of changing right now, transitioning to our summer pattern. 8 to 14 days. So this is May 31st to June 6th. So basically the first week in June, you still see a very similar pattern across the north central states. Again, pretty high confidence, even this far out. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 60 to 70% likelihood, 60 to 70% chance of having above average temperatures already. They're saying that for the first week of June. So I'd say that's pretty high confidence this far out. And similar precipitation pattern as in the 6 to 10 day, the one I just showed you. So yeah, potentially drier in the east, and potentially slightly wetter in the west, which again, the Black Hills often gets, makes its own weather in that part of the state. Just a hint at 8 to 14 days out, I kind of showed you the forecast of above average temperatures in that transition right at the end of May 31st to June 2nd. This was from today, this afternoon. Chance of excessive heat here in this region, which kind of catches eastern South Dakota. I normally wouldn't show it too much, but partly a health issue too. Be careful when you're out there doing your yard and garden work, in those hotter days. It's not too early, to have some heat effects from working outside, but also keep an eye on your plants and your yards and landscaping as well. 2 more slides to show you the June outlook. This was released just last Thursday. Haven't had a chance to write anything up on that yet, but looking at the temperature outlook on the left, no big surprise, leaning towards warmer than average temperatures across our region. And based on what I just showed you, I'm guessing in a week when they update this again, they may have even higher confidence in above average temperatures here in June. We'll wait and see what they say there. And then on precipitation on the right, you kind of see that pattern. Remember where we had kind of wetter conditions favored over the Rockies and the Southwest states. They have picked up on that. And again, South Dakota kind of in that kind of transition zone, kind of on the edge of the area, favored to be wetter in the Southwest. So a fair bit of uncertainty as we get into midsummer, June through August. Those 3 months all put together very difficult to say. We have a very strong El Nino in development in the Pacific Ocean, which is very unusual for this time of year. That's showing very warm ocean temperatures near the equator. Typically, we don't see that kind of behavior in the ocean until the winter time. And so what we're seeing here is kind of a mix of our long-term trends of summer temperature and precipitation kind of colliding with the signals that El Nino typically gives us. And so our trend is towards warmer, but El Nino says cooler, and so on. So a lot of uncertainty, I would say, in the summer season. What that tells me here, we'll probably see some ups and downs, some periods of warmth, periods of cooler, wetter, and drier, and so forth through the next 3 months, where it could be seeing some back and forth throughout the season. For those of you in the drier areas, really, I think we're going to rely on the rains, week to week, and just keep an eye out for those hot periods, and keep your plants moist as much as you can with your irrigation. So with that, had to talk really fast, Amanda, but I got through it. So,
and we've just got one question for you. I'm gonna guess that the NE is Northeast and not like Nebraska or something, but will the Northeast area get rain this week?
It's pretty quiet. Not seeing a lot. A few drips, maybe. Yeah, and there's a tree question and an asparagus question. So maybe
Yep. Well, you're off the hook for now. Thank you, Laura. And if anyone has additional questions for Laura, feel free to throw those in the Q&A, and you can scroll up the chat. I did put the Mesonet link in there as well. Next up, we have Dr. John Ball with his tree update.
All right, let's see here. Oops, did the wrong one. Sorry about that. Thought we hit that. There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm chatting with you from Rapid City today. I'm, excuse me, working West River for most of the week. As Laura mentioned, with the growing degree days, they have really pushed. And excuse me, Aberdeen, which the needle barely went off zero until beginning of May, is now at about 279. Rapid City 452. Excuse me, that should be Sioux Falls, not Rapid City twice. I apologize. But what it amounts to is we're kind of back to normal where we typically are, maybe a little ahead depending on where you're at, but we're not too far off where we started out way behind at the beginning. Well, what does that also mean? As Laura mentioned, that when we look at events such as flowering, as the lilac, they flowered about somewhere in the 300s, growing degree days, that also indicates development for insects. And typically when lilacs are blooming, pine needle scale nymphs have hatched. And you might not be able to see in this picture, but you might see the adult pine needle scale. That's that white in the center. And then there's these little darker dots around them. Those are the newly hatched nymphs, and they come out from underneath the shell of their dead mom. About Mom's Day, how's that? And now we're going to scurry around the needles and move to a place and begin to feed relatively quickly. And so now is the time for treatments. And with scales, the best control for scales is everything that eats scales. And that's why we try not to use a lot of harsh, if I can use that word, pesticides. In other words, pesticides that are just general killers, kill everything. What we typically use for these are soaps and superior oils. The reason being is they're pretty good at killing the nymphs, but not very good at killing a lot of the natural enemies of the scale. But now would be the treatment time for those. The other one is emerald ash borer, which again, Baltic was our newest community to now where we confirmed it. Quite honestly, if you live in Lincoln or Minnehaha County, most likely your trees or trees near you are infested. I can find infestations throughout those two counties. Now, again, there's areas where I'm not finding it either, or at least we're not able to find it. It might still be there. But those two counties, I've essentially, it's no surprise anywhere where we now find emerald ash borer. And of course, we now have it in Union County as well. So Minnehaha, Lincoln, and Union County are where really our hot spots for emerald ash borer are. Now, that's the good news. Our quarantines have worked. Emerald ash borer is moving much slower than it has in other states. Reason being, I believe, is the fact that we're holding to it. We're not moving wood from county to county to county. And if we did, that would spread much faster. States that have just said, once the insect arrives, okay, we're not going to quarantine, it usually moves across the state very quickly. But here it has barely moved, and I hope it stays that way. Now, by the way, you might have heard too, it was found in Moorhead, Minnesota. So essentially the eastern edge, it could show up just about anywhere. But right now its development is as pupae. They've kind of turned dark. They look a little bit more like adults. They emerge at about 550 growing degree days, about when black locust blooms. And I anticipate that's going to happen almost right on schedule in Sioux Falls, a little bit after Memorial Day. And for those that live in Sioux Falls, the city does still maintain that moratorium that you're not to move ash wood between Memorial Day and Labor Day. The reason being is that's when the adults are flying and they're trying to limit the movement of wood during that time period. We have a year-round quarantine that prohibits you from moving any hardwood firewood, because most people can't identify species, from any of those counties, Lincoln, Minnehaha, Union, and Turner County, at any time of the year. All right, what's going on out there? Well, the seed crop on elms is incredible this year. People are still calling me, what are these little discs? Well, those are seeds. How do I get rid of them? You don't. That's natural. That's what they're supposed to do. Just this year, they went crazy. Well, the other thing that went crazy are the squirrels. Squirrels are nipping the branches and the seeds are falling. And some think that they're after the seeds, and that's an easy way to do it. Some just think they're nipping it because of the sweetness. Some, like myself, think they're doing it just because they can. But don't be surprised, you go around your elm tree and you find all these very short little cut branches with a couple of seeds at the end. And that was the work of our friends, the squirrels. Now, this is another great year for seeds for silver maples. It's a bumper crop this year. And people are calling, what are these brown pods on my tree? Seeds, samaras, the little helicopters that'll be coming down here pretty quick. It's perfectly normal. It just happens to be in abundance this year. Now, what you're going to see later on is the trees are going to look a little thin. They're going to look like, how come they don't have a lot of leaves? Because that was the area where they produced a lot of flowers and seeds. So the trees might look a little thin this year because they produced a lot of babies. But other than that, no real concern. But yes, I'll admit, one more thing to rake up or sweep off your driveway or sidewalk. All right, what about winter? If you recall, we had a dry, warm fall. And it went on for a little bit longer than I typically see. And then we had a very long, cold winter. The combination of the two resulted in a lot of what we call winter desiccation injury. We didn't get dieback on trees because of the cold. We got dieback on the trees because they literally dried out. They didn't harden off quite as deeply as they should have, and they dried out very easily. And there's a lot of maples, particularly your Norway maples and your Freeman maples, such as the Autumn Blaze, that it looks like you drew a line straight across them. And below that, there's green leaves, and above that, it's dead or appears dead. Now, some of it will still bud out, so don't be too quick to prune it. But I would say early June, if the top hasn't leafed out yet, yeah, then you got to decide, is half a tree better than none, or just cut it down. Now, we saw this in 2012. We had the same circumstance then. So what we saw is our maples, our birch, those were the two big ones, but a number of other trees that were affected by it. And these are trees that are very desiccation sensitive. I'm getting pictures of dead Freeman maples. I mean, flat out dead to the ground. There's a whole row of them in Sioux Falls that was planted about 6 years ago, and they're all dead. And then redbud, a lot of dieback in these as well. Now, the two things people keep asking me, well, what can I spray? There's nothing we have that'll resurrect the dead. And then, should I fertilize it? We don't fertilize dead plants. It doesn't bring them back from the dead. So this is where you get a saw and you cut out the dead and see if you like it. Or in the case of the Freeman maples, you just cut them down and plant something else. But just remember, maples are very sensitive to desiccation injury, and that is something that appears. And the other question I get is, how come this tree died and the one next to it didn't? We frankly don't know. I mean, they're both maples, both the same cultivar, growing in the same area. One's dead, one's not. Luck of the draw, we'll call it right now, for lack of a better answer. But this one, oh my gosh, my phone's been ringing off the hook. I've been getting pictures of these trees. If you go around and look at Scots pines and Austrian pines on the eastern half of the state, what you'll notice is these dead tips throughout the tree. This isn't pine wilt disease, because pine wilt disease presents in late summer and fall, and the entire canopy's straw colored. This is dots here and there, and if you start looking close, you'll see a pattern. A little bit more on the windward side, a little bit more where the wind would funnel, for example. And if you look, it's the needles that are dead. The twig is still alive and the buds are still alive. And once again, it appears to be more or less random throughout the tree, sometimes somewhat directional, but even there, you're going to have live needles and dead needles. And this is affecting the needles that came on last year. Happened a lot in Colorado. They were experiencing the same thing. And once again, what happened is that long dry fall and cold, long winter. And it killed the needles. Didn't kill the buds, didn't kill the twigs. So what you're going to see is these needles are going to drop off. Hopefully the bud's still open and we get a new flush of growth, but the trees are going to look a little thin this year, a little bit more open. So take care of them. As Laura said, water. This would be a case water would help, but it's kind of an unusual phenomena we rarely see. And I think the other two speakers are going to be on tonight talking about this, Amanda and Rhoda. But flower thrips, it's the calls I've been getting from people that have little apple orchards. What is going on with my flowers? They look horrible. They're all smaller. They're all kind of crumpled. And if you shake them, you get all these little thrips popping out of them. And this is a flower thrip. Now, what they're doing is they're doing a little feeding damage on there. Now, interesting enough, there's more damage yet to come, because as they're laying eggs on the newly formed apples, they're going to puncture to lay the eggs, and that's going to cause a little bit of damage on the apples. Now, I'm getting a lot of people right now, what do I spray now? You don't spray a darn thing now. They're in bloom. And you'll kill your pollinators. So this is one of those things you just kind of have to sit back and accept as just a relatively rare event, but nevertheless one that occurred. And so with that, to stay on schedule as well, I'll stop sharing. And that was kind of an update of what's going on in the woody plant world in South Dakota at the end of May.
All right, John, we've got some questions for you.
Sure.
We'll hit them real quick because we're at 7:30. But
yep.
First one, relatively new American linden. It has a very long leading branch, so they're wondering if they prune the leader. It just seems overly tall, and they worry about it being eventually more tall than full.
Well, I wouldn't worry about that, but I'm okay with you pruning it back. And wait till the leaves have fully opened at this point. If it's only partially open, let them finish. But sometime this summer, you can cut that back by maybe even half. And that often happens with these lindens, is that terminal will just grow. Cutting it back is fine.
All right, now we've got one about Austrian pine needles. Is it okay to use the needles dropped from an Austrian pine that has died from pine wilt for mulch in flower beds and gardens?
The needles?
The
Yeah,
needles.
I guess you could. I mean, they're straw covered and to me ugly, but we don't have to worry. They're not going to have the nematode in them. So if that's your concern, no. The concern would be, and it's relatively rare, is the wood chips should not be spread around another pine. In theory, and they've managed to do it, but it's very difficult. They've managed to get the nematodes to actually go from the chips into a live tree, but even that's very tough to do. So if you like the straw colored needles, go for it.
And any ideas on what causes the increase in seed production in the things like elm and maples, et cetera?
You know what? They do have kind of a pattern about every 3 years or so. And so you can almost time it. Now, the problem is we don't really think of these things, but except for tree people like me, but it's kind of normal. They have a rhythm about every 3 years. Ponderosa pine does every 3 years. They get a bumper crop. It's just normal and natural, but the two kind of coincided this year. So we're just getting zillions of seeds, and the squirrels are happy, by the way. They feed
Yeah.
so we have happy fat squirrels out there.
And the last one for you is what can be done to help avoid the dieback of the maples?
Water.
Well, yeah.
Last fall. So what you need to do is get in your time machine, go back to fall and water. And by the way, I was right. Rarely happens, so I'll mention it. Is last fall I was telling people water, water, water. This is getting dry and long, and that's the best way to allow your plants to go in the winter. It's a myth that you want to withhold water in the fall. You do want to water them. So if it's dry this fall, and I don't know if Laura's given her whole year prediction yet, but if it's dry this fall, please do water. That will actually help your trees and shrubs better prepare for winter. And I'll finally say, yes, the list of shrubs that have died back is incredible. And it's the same thing.
Yeah, I know we'll have Laura on again towards the end of the garden hour season. So make sure to tune in August for like the better predictions about fall and listen to John when he tells you to water your trees.
Yes, water, water, water.
All right. Well, if folks have additional questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A, but we're going to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Rhoda Burrows. So I'll turn it over to you, Rhoda.
All right. And John, I lost a couple elderberry shrubs this year, and some that are looking kind of sick, and I think I probably didn't give them watered enough last summer. So we learn our lesson. I'm going to be talking tonight about, once we get this, talking tonight about strawberries, as I indicated, and you're starting to see them out in the greenhouses and nurseries, and maybe you're thinking about planting some. And a couple of things about selecting where to plant them. They do like quite a bit of organic matter in the soil, so you might want to work in some compost if your soil isn't already high in organic matter. And it's good to avoid placing them next to like an alfalfa field because some of the insects from the alfalfa will find their way over to the strawberries. Strawberries can get thrips also, and if you find your leaves curling up, I don't have a picture of it right now, but curling up almost like herbicide damage, that could be some flower thrips that are getting into the new growth of the strawberries. So keep an eye out for that this year. Here's one particular example of a annual production of strawberries. So we'll talk a little bit about a couple different production systems, but you can either plant them in the soil and keep them like a regular strawberry bed, or you could plant them and just grow them for one season with the everbearing or the day neutral types, and just grow them for a season and have them real easy to pick that way. Just a reminder about planting, they're a little bit fussy with the crown. normally we might think just where the roots come out should be the planting depth, but we all actually want to have it about halfway up the crown. So those roots are a little bit deeper. And if you get the crown all the way under, so you can almost see the buds on top right at ground level, that's a little too deep, and it will tend to give you some rotting root or crown rotting diseases. So just a reminder about that. Now we have two main types of strawberries that we're looking at. One is the June bearing. These are the ones that will start to fruit pretty quick now. And they'll go until about mid-July or so, and then they quit for the rest of the year. These should begin to fruit in the second year. If you plant them this year and they have flowers on them, remove those flowers. They need to put their energy into establishing the plant. If you allow them to fruit this first year, it's going to take away the growth of the plant overall. So after the mid-season, when they get done fruiting, is when they form runners, and you can create new plants out of that if you want. The other type of strawberry is the day neutral and or everbearing. They're very similar. There's slight differences, but we consider them basically as a unit. These can be allowed to fruit in the first year. You want to wait until they have 5 or 6 leaves on, and then once they have that, then you can go ahead and allow the fruit to form. These will fruit all season long. Well, sort of. Once the temperatures get over 85 degrees, that's a little too hot for those flowers to form. And so we'll have a cessation during hot days of summer, and then as it cools off in like late August, early September, we'll get fruit again. These tend to be shorter lived, maybe 2, 3, 4 years if you just keep them. And these are the ones also, because they fruit the first year, are the ones that are used as an annual crop. And almost all our commercial strawberries that we get in the grocery store are actually produced as an annual crop. They plant the plants, harvest the strawberries, pull out the plants at the end of the year. So with high tunnels, we sometimes see annual strawberries and sometimes see June bearing. Just a reminder, strawberries do suffer in hot, dry weather, so a mulch can help cut down those weeds that can be very aggressive with strawberries, and it can help retain the moisture as well. You do want to be a little careful about watching for certain bugs that like that mulch. So you might have to end up pulling that away a little bit if you get a lot of earwigs or that sort of thing, or slugs. I wanted to talk just briefly about some leaf diseases that are really common. The one on the upper left is the one I probably see the most in South Dakota, and I've seen whole patches have this. It can infect around the fruit, mostly on the leaves. And there are some cultivars that are resistant to this particular disease called leaf spot. So if you're needing a leaf spot resistant variety, look for that. Another forms of V shape on the end of the leaf, and they get soft, sort of pinkish brown rots on the fruit, and that's a leaf blight. And again, we look for resistant cultivars for that. And the last one I've seen less frequently, it's a leaf scorch. You notice on the left, all of the spots have a light colored center. On the scorch, it's sort of the same color throughout the blotch. And in this case, this rarely attacks the fruit, so we don't need to worry about it unless it's decreasing the health of the plant that it's gotten so bad. For these, we rarely use fungicides. We'd want to look first for resistant cultivars. And then one more that we can see, depending on what our weather is going to be like this year during cool, wet weather during flowering, is when we can get this gray mold, which is a fungus that gets in. You won't see symptoms on the leaves, just on the fruit and the flowers, or dead leaves can be covered with the gray mold as well. It can get into the blossom and just kind of stay there until the fruit ripens and then take over it, which is really disappointing. But so keep an eye out for that. And if you're seeing a lot of that on your plants, one of the things to do is make sure that you're maintaining row width, not just, you know, a solid 5-foot wide mass of strawberries. Get that air movement throughout it. Take off any of the dead leaves and fruit. And if you use straw mulch, pull that away every year and replace it. And there are some strawberries here that were June bearing strawberries here that have partial resistance to it. There are some fungicides that at bloom can help, and these would be some homeowner options. Captan or actinovate is a I believe a streptomyces. I'm not going to say it's an organic option anyway. And potassium bicarbonates can also help. And then finally, I'm going to mention venture a little bit into Amanda's territory, and she may want to weigh in on this too. But the tarnished plant bug is what can make this really deformed type of strawberry. And you've probably seen that if you've grown strawberries, because I remember seeing it as a little kid even. And this is the little bug that causes that. And they hang out in weeds, particularly flowering weeds. And when the strawberries start flowering, then they come over and say, hey, the fruit's ready. Let's all come have a picnic. So one of the things you want to do is make sure you're reducing the weeds around the strawberry patch. And there are some insecticides that can knock that back a bit. We want to start first with the integrated pest management with watching the weeds in particular. And as I mentioned, don't plant the strawberries near the alfalfa fields, because this is one bug that really likes alfalfa, that once those strawberries come, will be happy to jump over to the strawberries. And I think that's my spiel for tonight. I did see that we had a question on asparagus.
Yep, you've got a question on asparagus, and you've also got a couple on strawberries.
Okay. So picking asparagus, you can keep picking it until you start to get like pencil sized or smaller. See if I can get that in the right plane. Stems of asparagus, when they start getting really slender, that tells you you're on the last buds of that crown underneath. And so you need to let those go ahead and develop so that they can form the fern and replenish all the carbohydrates that the plant needs to overwinter and produce spears next year. Usually we say if it's a new planting, and you shouldn't harvest for the first 2 years, you can harvest in the third year. In that third year, you should take a light harvest only, so maybe a month or so. If it's a good, healthy, established asparagus, you might get by with 6 to 8 weeks of harvesting, and temperature will have a little bit to do with that too. So, and you can also allow some ferns to go if you miss some. You don't necessarily need to cut that fern down. Once it starts ferning out, it will release buds from the crown to keep coming, and it will inhibit those as long as it's growing and just starting to fern out. But once it's ferned out, there will be some more spears coming. So, okay, and What was the other questions?
So how far back on the stem do you prune the strawberry flowers?
Just under the flower. You can just remove the flower itself.
And then this person laid black landscaping fiber down and planted the strawberries to help prevent weeds. Is the black going to make the ground too hot for strawberries?
Probably not, because they should shade okay, and in fact in California they will grow on black plastic, so I think you'll be okay. If it's 118 degrees, maybe put out a sprinkler and cool it down a bit.
Yeah, we got bigger problems then. And what do you recommend mulching asparagus with?
Something that's fairly light and allows some water movement and air movement through. I wouldn't do anything that's real heavy.
All right. Those were all of your questions. And I am going to share my slides. I'm going to start out with the fun insects, and then I'm going to move into a short time-limited rant about a couple topics. So I talked at the beginning of May about when will monarchs show up, and I actually found monarchs in my backyard on Saturday. So I live in Pierre, so there were observations of adults in North Dakota as well. So monarchs have moved north. If you've got milkweed in your backyard, now is a great time to look for eggs. Keep an eye out for females that are laying eggs. It's called ovipositing. So yeah, monarchs are here. I usually collect a couple eggs from my backyard just to rear them, because I do have some wasps and they can get a little bit hungry for caterpillars. But again, do not collect eggs or plant material from state parks, public lands, anywhere that's not your own private property. But yeah, the eggs you can see are pretty dang tiny. And I did notice that the females do like to lay their eggs on the newer growth on the milkweed. So if you're looking for milkweed, if you're looking to see if females have been there laying eggs, check the new growth first is my tip. So speaking of wasps, this is the time of year I sort of always get questions. There's always memes going around about wasps and how, they're just real pains in the tuchus. But really, wasps are actually great predators. They are also some of our pollinators. They're not quite as fuzzy as bees, so they don't really move around the pollen quite as efficiently, but they still do some of that work for us. And if you've got like kale, broccoli, anything that you get the alfalfa caterpillars on, the cabbage white caterpillars, wasps can be really great at carrying those off as well. So wasps do have a purpose in the ecosystem, even if you maybe don't agree with their tactics. But now is the time that if you are noticing them building nests in high traffic areas, this is when you would want to deal with those. Don't wait until August or September when the nest is at its maximum size. But wasps actually do some really cool things for us. And unless you're mowing over a yellow jacket nest, usually they'll keep you, leave you alone. And I'm just going to do a real quick. Okay, we've got more hort questions coming in. Okay, so now for my full rant of the evening. Half of my job is pesticide education, and nothing irks me more than social media pesticide recipes. This is the latest one that has been making the rounds and driving me up all of the walls. I don't have enough time to go into all of the things that are wrong with it, but if you're going to go to this effort to mix up a homegrown recipe to kill weeds, please just go out there and pull the weed. It will be more efficient. Social media pesticide recipes have generally not been tested. They don't have any safety information that goes with them. They're not telling you what personal protective equipment to use, what sort of application rate, how frequently to apply, what some of the environmental impacts could be. If this recipe, which do not do, this is my big disclaimer, do not do the thing in this post. A gallon of white vinegar. Okay, the vinegar in your house is 5% acetic acid. 5% acetic acid is not going to do a thing to any sort of weed in the backyard, except maybe burn it slightly, and it's going to grow out of it. So white vinegar, not useful at all. A cup of salt, if you would like for, nothing to grow in that area, again, feel free to salt the earth. And then they're throwing in the tablespoon of dish soap, so you have a little bit of surfactant. That's like the one kind of like kernel of something that might work. So please, 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 please do not use pesticide recipes from social media. There are tons of products out there, some of which are even organically derived, organically labeled, that you can use to help solve whatever pest issues are plaguing you. Also, you've got great resources here at Extension to help with your, weed management tactics, some integrated pest management techniques, things to solve these problems that do not involve picking up something that was shared chain letter style on social media. So please don't do it. And I will end with the Western flower thrips, coming at these a little bit from the urban entomology side of things. They are teeny tiny. And I was out in Brookings on Sunday for Garden Discovery Fest, which was a lot of fun. If you missed it this year, definitely come hang out with us next year. But I was outside long enough that I definitely had some thrips that kind of hitchhiked with me on my drive back. And on me, one thing that thrips can do is they actually cause a little bit of skin irritation. So if you're like weirdly a little bit itchy outside and you're in eastern South Dakota this time of year, it might actually be the thrips. And really, wear long sleeves, go inside, take a shower. They're not anything that like feeds on humans, but they have, just enough activity that they can be kind of irritating. But yeah, we've just gotten a lot of questions from all sorts of, we've gotten, folks that are in greenhouse situations that have these thrips moving in to, like John said, out in apple orchards. And I think they kind of just showed up like before we've got a bunch of their natural enemies out there to really snack on them and keep them in check. But yeah, they're sort of our weird, like, insect of the week that none of us were super expecting. So with that, I will stop my share, take a quick look at the Q&A. Got a question about, do butterfly houses work? Not particularly. I would say a lot of the sort of like insect house things that are marketed, something will use it. It's probably not going to be what you're expecting. It's honestly probably going to be wasps. So butterfly houses, the best thing you can do for butterflies is to provide flowers. They especially enjoy flowers that have sort of an open, flat sort of top. So if you think of like the Tithonia sunflowers, the Mexican sunflower, your cosmos, your zinnias, flowers like that. And just having that diversity of habitats, if you've got, a brush pile, if you've got some shrubs, some places that are a little bit protected, that's, and honestly, adult butterflies aren't necessarily hanging out for an extended period of time. They're looking for their host plant that they can lay eggs on. And then, their life cycle is they'll lay eggs for a little while, but, they're not going to be super long lived as adults. So don't worry about butterfly houses. We do have a question for you, Rhoda, back on the asparagus. What's the best way to clean a very weedy patch of asparagus?
Cry a little. It depends on what the weeds are, whether they're annual weeds or perennial weeds. And very often, unfortunately, they're perennials because they sneak in from the sides and get in there. At this point during the season, I would hand weed as much as I could, pull up what I could, and just keep after it. A good time to get the weeds. One option is to do a complete harvest of asparagus and take off the spears a little bit below the soil line, and then you can spray an herbicide that's labeled for asparagus. But hopefully the asparagus isn't going to want to take it up. And I know that's recommended, but I'm always a little iffy about the ends of those spears. Another time that you can get it is in the spring, if you can get some of those before the asparagus pops up. So very early spring, you may want to come in, and you can even do a light till for, say, a couple inches down into the soil. So that's another option. And then the third option is, once the canes have died off in the fall from a freeze, if you've got things like thistles or some grasses that are still green at that point, that would be another time to hit them.
All right. And we are close to the end of our time tonight. So I am going to go back around to each of our panelists to see what they have to say to keep an eye out for over the next week, maybe what their plans are for the upcoming long weekend, or any of the garden tasks that they think you should be getting after if you've got 3 days off. So we'll start with you, Laura. What's sort of the outlook for the next weekish?
You know, it looks like, you know, like I said, warmer than average temperatures, you know, about 10 degrees above average or more for this time of year. So great weather, not looking at a lot of rain. So if you get some lake time in, that'd be perfect. And finish up planting those gardens, you know, and I know a lot of folks did no mow May, but we're getting close to the end of my grass is getting pretty long right now, and I'm itching to get out and mow. But yeah, it'll be a great week to grow a garden. Just keep it watered.
Awesome. Yeah, I absolutely had to mow my grass last weekend. So don't worry, guys. The dandelions recovered spectacularly. Like, it's fine. You can go mow your grass.
Oh, and up here in the north, you know, things are just starting to bloom here. So lilacs are just starting, flowering trees, like my apple trees look great right now. So it'll be a great week to watch those blooms too.
Awesome. John, any last words of wisdom from you?
Yeah, words of wisdom not happening, but I'll chime in with Laura, and that is true. Up north, they're getting an accordion of seasons. Everything's kind of blooming at once. We actually saw that in Brookings too. Shrubs that normally bloom at the end of April, or excuse me, end of March, were blooming at the beginning of May, along with some other stuff. So enjoy it while it lasts. As good South Dakotans, we always know if we get something good, that means something horrible will follow. So I expect heat and drought and desolate for the rest of the year.
Man, just a ray of sunshine. And Rhoda, any last minute tips for this next week?
Well, I'll echo what the others have said. Get out there and water. If you've got seedlings coming up, those roots aren't very deep yet, so make sure you're keeping them watered. And transplants, if you have not done so, make sure that you're hardening them off before you plant them.
Yeah, plants can get sunburned. That's something that some people forget. Yeah, I will absolutely be getting my garden in this weekend. And for those of you that might be out in some of our natural areas, make sure you've got your tick repellent on. Tuck those pants into your socks. I don't care how dorky it looks, but the ticks are out. So keep that in mind. We want everyone to stay safe this weekend, and we'll see you back here again next week on Tuesday for another edition of Garden Hour. Thanks so much for joining us, and happy gardening.